Hi, Carla.
Hi, so good to meet you. I'm so happy that we get this chance to actually have a chat. And
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's nice to be able to speak to an artist who understands, empathizes, and is in lockdown. You know,
yeah, that is one of the things that I think about lockdown is that now that we're all on Zoom all the time, it's almost easier to meet people and talk to people and share ideas and collaborate. And it's very strange. It's a different kind of world, but we've entered
yeah,
this virtual universe. It's kind of
yeah, and I think good things can come out of it. So, I mean, I definitely see us coexisting in two worlds. You know, the one that is going to be virtual and one that's going to be real now on. I cannot see us
yeah.
going back to being the way we were in a way.
Yeah, I
So,
completely agree. I think there are so many positives in terms of creative work, and I mean, of course, there's all the frustration as well that comes with Zoom and internet sound quality and things, but you can do some really amazing things, and I think it's a little way of bringing us all a bit closer together. I can imagine it could be quite exciting when we can combine both things, live
yeah,
things and
yeah.
online.
Yeah, if I live in Yorkshire, so and live and work in Yorkshire, so jumping onto a train and going to London and all that is sometimes a expensive as well as
Yeah.
time-consuming business. So it's like going to be easier to say, "Hi, I live in Yorkshire. I'm happy to do this work for you. So would you like me to do this work?" So easily convey that on Zoom rather than in person. So.
Absolutely, yeah. So tell me a bit about your work. I'm very excited to hear about all the things you're doing, but especially like what have you been doing during lockdown? How have you found ways to keep being creative?
I think as you know, I do music and composition, and my root identity and core work is South Indian classical music based. So I'm a vocalist. I sing. And I use my South Indian classical training to make music as well. So, and I do a lot of work with musicians from across different disciplines in the world, different disciplines, different genres. So I think that's what excites me. It's the thing of music having no boundaries in a way. So my work is about what can I do that will reach my music out into the world through different kinds of media, as well as what can I do to embrace new cultures and new techniques and new nuances in the music and make something new, different, interesting. So I think that's curiosity and a drive for new blends in a way. Sort of that's what drives me.
Hmm.
Um, and lockdown has been pretty much like you mentioned about doing collaborations internationally, nationally. So I've worked very closely with Duncan Chapman, who's a sound artist. And what we have done is invited collaborations from a third artist. And we've done some really live responses, which have varied in audience numbers. So we have had 15 people listen to one, and we've had 150,000 people listen to the next. And we are like,
Wow.
oh, hang on now, who are these 150,000 people? Could you please stand up and yeah, maybe give us a pound each? But that's what
Yeah.
I mean. It's that kind of thing. But yeah, it's been an interesting time. Some things learned, lessons learned in lockdown are here to stay, and some will perhaps revert back to old ways. Definitely.
Yeah.
What about you, Carla? Tell me a little bit about yourself. And
Um, well, I'm one of those people like you that does a huge mixture of things, and it's quite hard to define. It's like, I mean, fundamentally, I'm a flute player. I specialize in low flutes, so I've got like this one behind me, the contrabass. I also play a lot on Kingma system flutes, so they're microtonal flutes. That mean I can play quarter tones and a whole load of different kinds of alternative fingering. So it's great for playing music from different cultures. Um,
oh,
really interesting to explore different scale patterns and microtonal languages. I find that, and the different colors that you can get from different tunings, I find utterly fascinating. So I do a lot of that. One of the things I've been doing a lot of actually during lockdown is playing baroque flute as well. So I've been playing that for maybe about 10 years, but now that everything's doing so much solo stuff, it's actually been really fun to just sort of explore that. And originally I got into playing Baroque flute because I wanted to use it for contemporary music, but I've also been using it for Baroque music, which has been a bit of a surprise for me, but I love it. So and that there's this thing that I find really fascinating, which is how the two flutes I play, one's got 6 holes and 1 key, and then the other one's got as many keys as you could possibly put on it.
Wow.
And yet somehow they meet in the middle with this kind of thing about tunings and different colors and different notes having different colors, and how you can use the tunings to be very expressive. So that's kind of the playing side. But I've also been doing a lot of improvisation recently. So one of my lockdown projects has been, I've had a long time collaboration with Scott Miller, who's an American electronic composer. And he's been doing quite a lot of work on telematic systems, so ways that we can play together live over the internet without having all the problems that you have with Zoom, where you can't play at the same time, or latency issues or that kind of thing. So we've been exploring. And the beginning of lockdown, the first lockdown last year, we were doing this amazing thing where we had, I was playing to him through Zoom, and then he was taking my sound into his computer in Minnesota, doing live electronic processing, sending it back to me via a Skype link. So we had Zoom and Skype on at the same time. We had this kind of big thing going on. That was how we started, but we sort of refined it since then and been working on these new systems and different bits of software and trying things out, and improvising to graphic scores. And we've brought in Sarah Watts, who's a clarinetist and part of my ensemble Rare Scale. So we've been playing with her as well. And that's been amazing. I did one concert basically with Scott and then 2 other musicians that I've never met. And it was just live performance over the internet. One was in New York and one was in Minneapolis. So it was quite amazing to be able to do that. And Scott and I have collaborated for years, but it's relied on one of us flying somewhere and then, spending a few days together and creating some material. Whereas now we can meet every couple of weeks and just play music together, which it's been amazing, actually. Quite an eye-opener. And then my other job is I run a music degree course for the Open College of Arts. So actually they're based quite near you. They're based in Barnsley.
Oh, yes.
But we're a distance learning university. And basically it's an amazing organisation because it's open access. So the whole idea is to get people into higher education that maybe wouldn't ordinarily have the opportunity. So we have some amazing students.
Fantastic.
And of course in lockdown we've been moving all the assessment processes online. I did a whole heap of course writing last year because the students were working really fast through the materials. But so it's been a really big mixture of creative projects and teaching and, sort of educational things, keeping people going and just kind of, I've been talking to people all the time. It's been quite amazing. But I've been on Zoom a lot for the last year.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
We've all been Zooming, if that's even a term.
It is now. And lots of recording as well. I've turned this little space. I mean, this is a tiny little room I've been in for the last year, but I've basically got it all set up so I can record here now as well, which has been really fun.
Fantastic. So does that recording actually go into any albums, or is it recording for some work, or?
Yeah, big mixture of things, really. I've done some things that have just gone out onto the internet as kind of pre-recorded concerts. I did a symposium for Nottingham University last year. And then, some various projects. I'm doing a project with the Irish Composers Collective at the moment. They've all written, I think 5 or 6 new pieces being written that will go onto an album. I'm recording it all here. And I did another project with Karen Power, again, another collaboration where she sent me an audio track to improvise to. She does these amazing sort of audio scores where you're sort of inspired by what you're hearing and respond to that. So she made an album with lots of different collaborators. So it's been, a very big mixture of things.
Fantastic.
Yeah, you somehow have to stay active, even though the concerts stop. There has to be a way of.
Yeah.
You can't stop making music. It's just not an option.
Absolutely, and I think we creatives find a way out of things to keep ourselves mentally and emotionally challenged, because otherwise we can't give up, right? So that's absolutely true. And Pretty much with the kind of music that I make, my ears perked up on a few things that you said, because that's exactly how I work. And it would be great to explore something together at some point, because obviously I come from a discipline of completely improvisation,
Mhm.
completely responding to something rather than, because there cannot be a return score when you're creating something new with the Indian music system. You tend to have a lot of improvisation, although in the South Indian tradition that I follow there is a lot of lyrical component, but that lyrical component sort of forms the basis of how you then expand the piece into something unique. And so I work with, as you know, Karen Deflett, who's a common friend. I
Yeah.
work with her in that manner. So I send her the scale, and Karen sends me back her response, and then we collaborate on whether I want something changed. And that there is a thing. I have a thing for wind instruments. I think I'm I am in that corner firmly. I absolutely love the low notes, bass flute and the bass clarinet. Those
Yeah.
are the things that really get to the core of where my music sits. So, yeah, I mean, so many things that you said there resonated. The way you work with Scott. Pretty much, Duncan and I, we are going through a similar process where. I was singing through WhatsApp in the first call, and then he was capturing it on Skype. And then we have tried a variety of approaches. Then I ordered myself a little small Scarlett Solo just to keep the mic and the quality of the voice clear. And he is now using something called the Sonobus. Now, I don't
Oh
know whether
yeah.
you, yeah, I don't know whether you have heard. So, I mean, I think it's a discovery process, isn't it? How do you make music online without all those lags and lapses? And how
Yeah.
are you happy with it?
And
Yeah,
also, what kind of music suits that medium? Because I think, I mean, it's a bit like online teaching as well. If you're the kind of instrumental teacher that needs to kind of stand very close to the student and, write on the score for them and all that kind of thing, then that, of course, is very difficult to translate online. And it's the same about the kind of music you're playing. If you try to play ensemble music that has to be really exactly together over the internet, that's really difficult.
yeah,
But for improvising, I think it's wonderful because you can, the latency isn't so much of a problem that you're still aware of what everybody is doing and you're very much close. It's just like being in a massive room or something. But it does work, and I think it's about adapting. Somehow, it's about adapting the music to the technology and adapting the technology to the music. So we've got this kind of cycle where it all develops together. That's really
totally,
interesting.
totally, absolutely. I mean, it'll be really nice to actually be able to, if you have any pieces of music out there online, do send them across, and I would absolutely love to have a listen to that collaborative music that you're
Yeah,
making with
of course.
people across the world.
Yeah, I'll send you some links. But I think, that it's very interesting what you're saying about low woodwind. And I think there's this connection with the voice and the breath, which is, it's so much a part of expression. I think one of the things I find really fascinating is how the actual breathing process is part of how the music sounds. It's not a kind of extra that's a kind of inconvenience, it's actually part of the music. And I think the bigger the instruments go, the more the breathing becomes part of the music.
Yeah.
And all the resonances. I mean, for singing, that must be something you're conscious of all the time, is how the voice is resonating in the body and how you use the body and all that kind of thing. I think they're not so different from that perspective.
Absolutely. For Carnatic music, all the resonance has to happen around the diaphragm. So you're throwing your voice from the diaphragm constantly. There is nothing called the head voice or
Okay.
the throat voice. If you have to have the sound rooted in your diaphragm. So I think that's where that connection comes to, that low wood
Yeah.
instruments. For me, definitely, it's also about, like you said, the heartbeat and the quality of the quiet nature of some of the micro sounds made in between the notes. that really matters when, when I'm thinking music. For me, that really matters. And I like I like music, and I make music the kind you would say is very reflective, meditative, quiet. So, and I don't know, I mean, rhythms form a huge part of the Indian classical tradition, but for me, the rhythm doesn't play the central core role. I'm more about gently unfurling the notes rather than worrying about the rhythm. So I think that's where my closeness to wind instruments. I did a project called Lullaby Sonic Cradle, and that was the core idea behind that, where people could relax and control their breath and have that whole experience of being quiet for some time. So
And that's an amazing thing. That's something that we kind of, I mean, I guess we're getting it again now, but modern life and quietness and taking time, those things don't go together very well. And I think it's something we've lost somehow.
yeah.
I did some amazing concerts a few years ago with a pianist called John Tilbury, playing music by Feldman. And we play one of the pieces called For Christian Wolf, which is 3.5 hours long of flute and piano.
Wow.
And everything has to be so quiet and so controlled. And it's one of the most exhausting things I've ever done. But it takes you to that place where there's nothing else. You're just in the sound and you feel the sound and you're concentrated on that. It's quite an amazing experience. Um,
Wow.
and I think music that does that, it takes you outside of normal life. I think it's a really powerful thing. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that completely makes sense, and that resonates a lot with the kind of experience that music means to me as well. So it's
mhm.
it's about being one with the music rather
Yeah,
than drawing everybody into that oneness
yeah,
rather than worrying about the various elements. And I love the idea. One of the reasons I really love collaborating with people from outside the discipline, as you would call it, because you people from the same discipline, same musical styles come together and you recreate something that is technically perfect. And for me, that perfection doesn't work in my head. I'm like
yeah,
almost saying, I don't really want perfection. I want those tiny imperfections that
yeah.
actually make it more connected. So it's lovely to play with somebody who has never been exposed to Carnatic music before. It's like, oh, wow. So can I play the notes like this? And I'm like, yes, feel free to play the notes any which way you want. And that's the joy, isn't it, of
Yeah.
weaving together things. So,
And I
yeah.
think also that idea of being a little bit out of your comfort zone is where the good ideas come from. It's that thing about, I think also, I mean, it's even, improvising, if you're always playing with the same people, you get the same ideas coming back, you get the same sort of, you kind of almost predict how each other are going to respond to a particular idea. So then you start to control. I mean, I find this a little bit when I'm playing with Sarah, because we've been playing together for such a long time that we can almost, not quite, but we can almost predict. Sometimes we try and surprise each other. But I think that kind of freshness of viewpoint is really important, and being able to try something that puts you in a situation that feels it's a little bit risky, it's a little bit scary. I think that's really exciting. The first main improvised concert I did with Scott a few years ago, he wrote a piece called Islands, and we've been working on it for a really long time in various different forms. But it's basically an electronic soundscape, but it's basically determined by the sound levels in the venue. So
Wow.
he puts a microphone up in the room, and then whatever sounds come from the audience or from me, if I'm playing loud, it'll change something. And the score is a map, or actually it's a photograph of a place, of an island system. And the idea is that you take the listener on a journey, and the electronics is programmed so that different places have different sounds within that journey. But then as the kind of improvising flute player, my job is to control the speed of the journey and also the direction. So if I play too loud too soon, the piece is over too quickly. And the first time I did it was really difficult because I didn't know how to control that. and it was very much a case of trying to pace it and trying to figure out how the electronics would respond to what I was doing. And the big challenge has been, can we make it really long? Can we make it a 20-minute piece? So a couple of years ago, we did some touring with it and got to play it quite a few times. And I was playing on bass flute and playing in the dark. And, it became a really interesting and quite moving experience for all of us, because it was always about playing very, very softly and playing sounds where you couldn't quite predict what would come out. So, playing multiphonic fingerings where, maybe on a good day it would work and maybe it wouldn't. And so you don't quite have that predictability. It was very exciting to perform.
Sounds absolutely fabulous. I've been reading a little bit about the Kingma flutes from your biography. What is that system? That I've not before this I haven't come across that.
And let me just grab a flute, seeing as there's one just there. It's a normal flute in all senses. It's a normal flute, but with some extra bits, basically.
Right.
So, I mean, if I hold up, this is just the normal size flute,
Yeah.
but it looks like a normal flute, except it's got two keys here where normally there'd only be one.
Yeah.
On the back, there are 4 keys for the thumb where normally it's upside down,
Right.
but let me put it that way, it's easier. There's 4 keys where there normally be 2.
Yeah.
And essentially what it's doing is when you have a key with a hole in, on a normal flute, you only have 5 holes.
Yeah.
Whereas on this flute, it has the equivalent of a hole on every single key.
Right.
So what that means is that you can play even quarter tones, because by opening the middle hole, you get a quarter tone.
Right.
So just slide in the hole, you get a quarter tone. So basically what the system does means that you have effectively a key for every single quarter tone.
Wow.
So if I played a scale.
Yeah.
So the whole quarter tone scale suddenly doubles up the number of notes in an octave.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous.
And it basically means that you can do all sorts of extra things, because they can be, I treat those notes as the starting points. So all of the things that you can do with extra fingerings and different sound colours and different multiphonics and different, all those kind of things, you can start from those points and then expand outwards.
And this is perfect for improvisation from, of course, India, because obviously because of the nature of the ornamentation of Indian music, but also music from other parts of other cultures in the East. I mean, I can see resonances with the South Korean, Iranian, Indonesian music.
Yeah.
I can see that it'll work really well if you were sort of collaborating with somebody from those disciplines as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one of my flute students actually is doing a PhD at the moment, looking into how the Kingma system can be used for Japanese shakuhachi techniques. And he's doing some amazing work. So he started by transcribing some shakuhachi melodies, but discovering new fingerings that would create the tone colors, and it's really fascinating. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where everybody that starts to play these instruments finds a new area to kind of explore and find out about. It's really amazing, and I think it's still very much. I mean, this system's been around for 20 years or more, but it's in fact a little longer than that now. But everybody finds their own voice with it. It's a real kind of and you can use it also for playing in an orchestra. For normal standard classical playing, but it means that you've got much more flexibility with things like intonation. If you want to play really loud and you want to control the tuning, you can just play a quarter tone difference and not have to hold back. Sometimes it gives you lots of opportunities and flexibility, but for improvising it's amazing.
I can imagine it would be, because some of I mean, from my own experience of working with collaborators who play the flute or even similar instruments, some of the Indian ragas are slightly bit more complicated because they have so much ornamentation in between proper notes that, it's to capture that even in any element. And, if you don't, then you don't feel like you're playing that in improvisation to that scale. And so it's a complicated system. We do navigate, but something like this will be a perfect way of getting there. So what you've been championing this, isn't it, for some time? So, what got you into this, and how did you get there?
Um, Good question. I got there from low flutes. So my big passion as a teenager actually was the alto flute,
Right.
and I just loved the sound of it. And when I was a kid, I tried it on a flute course, and like nobody had one, and I was just like, I want this sound, I want one. So I became really kind of a little bit overexcited about it, and I saved money up basically as a teenager until I could buy one, and no one else had one, which was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And so I had to basically learn how to play it and learn how to make the best sound. And it was a great experience in terms of really thinking about what I was doing and how to get the good sounds from it and everything. But the trouble was, when I went to college, I started doing new music, and I've always loved composing. And I was doing composition at college, and I met all these composers, and nobody wanted to write for the flute. That was boring. The flute had been written for 1,000 times and very well by lots of composers. So they wanted a new kind of sound. So, of course, they all were really fascinated by the alto flute, and that it had this different kind of sound quality. It hadn't been used a lot by that point. So it was still quite new and quite exciting. But of course, the big frustration for me is that most of the big flutes have closed holes. So the open holes I'm showing on the Kingma system or on a normal flute just aren't there because of the size of the instrument. And that means like you're really limited. So I mean, if I'm with the contrabass flute, this one here,
Yeah.
that one has closed holes. So I feel like I literally have half the notes in every octave that I have on the Kingma system flute.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's half a flute somehow. And it does very cool things because it plays low notes. But in terms of the things that I like to do, I feel like there are things missing. So on the alto flute, it felt like it was really limited, and the composers wanted to explore it and I wanted to explore it, but the flute wouldn't do it. So then I heard about Eva Kingma, who is this Dutch flute maker, and I heard about her work, and she, by that point, so this was like late 90s, she'd already developed the Kingma system C flute, and the work had started on a bass flute. She'd made an open hole bass flute to start with and realized that you can put a key on top of another key
Right.
to create these open holes.
Wow.
So then she expanded that across the whole flute. So at the point that I'd met her, I don't think she'd made a complete alto flute with a complete system. She'd made one with most of it, but there was, I think, maybe one key missing or something. So I went along and said, I was very lucky. Had the support to do it, and I asked her to make me a Kingma system alto flute.
Wow.
And that was, it was perfect timing because it was the beginning of my career, basically. It was
Right.
the end of my degree, the beginning of my postgrad. And it was exactly the right time to be working with composers and developing this thing, and finding out what you could do. So it's been my playground ever since, really. So I started with the alto flute, and then a bit later on I got a bass flute and then a C flute. But so now I play on all three. And it's kind of, I'm so used to it now, I don't even notice when I'm using the extra keys. It's just part of what I do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Practice, isn't it? That's the key to everything, really.
Absolutely.
No, that sounds fascinating, and I would absolutely love to, probably informally do a jam session with you on,
That would be fun.
it sounds like a brilliant combination of, improvisation, double notes. I mean, I can see that unfolding really well. So
I can
yeah, no,
imagine.
let's
Yeah,
do that some point for sure.
that would be
Uh,
wonderful. So, in terms of learning about South Indian music, what's the best way for someone who has never done it before?
I think going back to the basics with learning the scales first of all, and learning how to use. I mean, if you want to be an vocalist, even if you want to be an instrumentalist, you need to learn some basic exercises. So it's a structured system. The structures came into place around the 17th century, and before that it was a much more loose system where singing and lyric and song were the main components of
Mm-hmm.
the music. But following that, there is a structure, and a new entrant into the music world goes through this whole exercise regime where the voice is trained, rhythm is taught, and you also learn a little bit about the scales. And so that goes on for around a couple of years. And then from there on, it's up to you and your skills to be able to grow that quickly enough, or take your own time. So that's a decision you can make. But on an average, from starting to learn the very basics to perhaps having the capacity to perform, it will be, I would say, a minimum of 5 years. And the system in India is so entrenched in having permissions from your teacher to actually go on stage and perform.
Mm-hmm.
So performance is something that is not treated lightly. So you might do a couple of community recitals here, there, everywhere. But if you're actually wanting to qualify and perform as a concert instrumentalist vocalist, then you actually seek permission, and your teacher then says, right, you are ready now. And I think it's a bit about being mentally and spiritually ready, as well as being voice trained and all those things. So there is still the system entrenched in India, where, if you're genuinely following the tradition, then you sort of learn. And even the learning in India is quite a sort of entrenched thing. You actually go and stay with your guru, and our guru is the teacher, and they will teach you in the course of various discussions, and you sort of a part of the member of the household, and then you learn the music as you live the life. And that's known as gurukul. And then teacher says, yes, now I think you're ready to do the first thing, go ahead. And then you do that, and then you go back and learn some more, and then you go and do something, and then you go back and learn. So I think the teacher disciple relationship lasts for as long as uh, the teacher is alive. Usually, my teacher passed away 3 years ago. Until she was alive, I never felt like I had learned everything. And I don't feel that even now. But when she was around, every time I met her, it would be like, oh my God, she's got so much to teach me even now. So it's like, yeah.
It's
So that's a
amazing.
little bit about South Indian classical and the Indian tradition of music.
It's amazing. I mean, I think that's one thing that I love about music is that you never know everything. There's always more to learn. It makes it so exciting because you just keep going. But that must have been quite a difference when you came here between that system and what we have here, and especially with teaching here and how different that is. That must have taken quite a sort of mental shift to get that kind of just to see how things are here and how different it is.
Yeah, I mean, I moved here around 25 years ago, and I moved here with my family, and so my children were growing up. They were very young then, and they were growing up here, and so I learned a little bit of the education system with them. So as they were
Mm-hmm.
growing, I was learning as well. And I did find there were some fundamental differences in the way the teacher disciple or teacher student relationship was. uh, of course, good things in each system. And you so what I have done is probably taken the best of both the systems and sort of used them as something that I need to follow. And there are some aspects of the system here that I really appreciate. One of the things is that even though the teacher is the knowledge giver and the student is the knowledge receiver, it is a fluid relationship, and sometimes the exchange can be the other way around. And that is something I really learned here, and I keep that in my practice even till today. I mean, whoever I work with, I always have this approach of wanting to learn as much as give. So it is,
Yeah,
I think, just adapted the best of both systems. There were some challenges mentally. You change your mindset and think, oh, okay, so that doesn't work here. This is how it works.
yeah,
And then you adapt to it and change. But I think best of both worlds.
yeah. It's really interesting that thing about how much you can learn from teaching. I find that really fascinating, and especially actually with the students I'm working with now at OCA because they're mostly adults and they have every single one of them has some really fascinating life experience to share and to bring to their studies. And I find that really wonderful, that all those personal stories and how everybody approaches everything differently, and they have a different way of communicating things, and even different musical tastes. I find that really wonderful as well, that these people are all doing a music degree, but they're coming from different places, and their view of what music is when they start is different. And I think that's, I love that sort of diversity of voice, and I find that really fascinating. And I think as a teacher, I mean, I learn so much from my students. I think I always have. It's just that thing about, just seeing something a different way. And I think also the other thing is, from a physical perspective, playing something like the flute, there's so much of our sound is created by our bodies, and we all have different bodies, and everybody does things in different ways, and just being able to see what happens, just observing different things in different people, and how that impacts on the sound, I think that's fascinating as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, even when we work with different collaborators, and I'm sure it's the case for you as well, we sort of take take things from the person as it's happening, and then respond to that and give back. Even though you may have something in your mind, that is set aside, and you just go with what your collaborator is offering you, and then
Yeah,
change your plans and learn and go that way. And I think really good things come out of that kind of an approach, where you're constantly listening closely and doing things in response to what somebody else is offering at that point in time.
yeah,
And yeah, it's a little bit about listening skills as well, which I find fascinating. In developing listening skills is something that takes some time.
definitely. And yeah, when you're improvising, resisting the temptation to play all the time, and know that
Yeah,
sometimes it's okay to do nothing, and that's absolutely fine. And sometimes
yeah,
you need to take a bit of time to think about it and come in the right point. And yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting.
In 2013, I did a tour with two musicians. One was Sri Ram. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
He's based in London, and he's a bass player, flute player he sort of straddles the Western Indian tradition. And then I worked with Ben Castle, I don't know if you know Ben. He's a jazz clarinet, bass
Okay.
clarinet, a saxophone player. He's Roy Castle's son. I'm not
Oh
sure if,
wow. Yeah.
yeah, he plays a wonderful, bass clarinet and sax. And the thing about touring with two musicians is a completely improvised concert. We did about 8 performances, and we discovered that in each of these performances were different, because at the time of improvisation, some one person felt like taking the lead. And the minute one person took the lead, everybody else just fell into the groove and supported this person, rather than worry about playing too much or
Yeah.
playing on top of each other. We just went with it. And it was really fascinating when we heard back, and we thought, oh my God, not two concerts are the same. They're all different. And there are good things in all of them which are so different. And we probably couldn't recapture them.
Yeah.
But it was that thing of taking the lead and letting the lead be taken sometimes.
Yeah.
It's okay to do that, which is fascinating. So I wanted to also ask you about what your favorite projects have been. I know you've played with a lot of you've played compositions by a lot of composers, and I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you who was your favorite composer. That would be
Yeah,
that
that would
would
be
be challenging.
impossible.
But what was your favorite project in this journey of flute that you've been making?
Wow. There have been so many of them. I think one of my favorite projects recently actually has been discovering the Baroque flute and playing new music on that. Um, because it's been a journey, because it's so different, and of course it's an instrument that's designed for playing Baroque music, which is mostly tonal. It's got a particular approach which works very, very well. But then when you try and use that instrument for new music, there's all these questions about how you break free from that. So, composers writing in different languages, a lot of the composers I work with are already thinking in microtonal languages anyway, because of the other work that I do. And so how do you translate that onto an instrument that's basically got 6 holes? It's a very interesting problem. And the fingerings are different from the modern flute. So I first of all had to learn the new fingering system, and then the new tuning system, and then just have these challenges. And composers would write pieces for me that, they know what I do, and they'd write pieces that are like, oh yeah, this is fine. But there would be a million times more difficult to play them on the Baroque flute. And that I've really loved that challenge. I'm somebody that enjoys challenges, and I want to keep things fresh and new by doing new things that are kind of pushing me in different directions. And I think so that's been one of the really interesting things over the last few years, is just having to learn essentially a new instrument. I mean, it's still a flute, but having to learn how it behaves, and the instruments are made of wood, so every instrument feels a bit different, and depending on the temperature, the wood will change, characteristics and all this kind of stuff. So that's been really fun, because it's been a real eye-opener, and I've learned so much from that. So that one's been fun. There are various composers that I have some affection for playing their music. One of those is a guy, I love all the music that I get to collaborate with people on. It's just amazing, because every project's unique.
Sure.
It's a bit like saying, what's your favorite child? It's like, that's not really a thing. But there's a German composer called Klaus Biel that I've worked with quite a lot over the years. And one of the things I love about his music is that he gets just the right balance between challenge and expressivity.
Right.
I'm not interested in technique for the sake of it.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of potential that new music can become a very complex technical exercise that says nothing.
Yes.
But I find with Klaus's music, he writes music that when I first see it, I think, this is impossible. I'm never going to be able to play this. So it's got the challenge element, but there's also quite a strong musical meaning that I identify with very clearly. So all the pieces that he's written for me have been the same. Every single one at the beginning, I'm just completely terrified, and it's always like, I can't do this. There was a bass flute piece he wrote for me where I got so dizzy when I played it that he had to write an electronic interlude in the middle to give me a break so that I could stop the room from spinning. It's like, it's great because you get this challenge, and there's a real buzz from actually performing those pieces, and you spend a lot of time with them. And so that's one of the other things that I've really enjoyed, is like working with composers that teach me about the instrument.
Yeah.
And they push me further, and they might come to me and say, I want this sound, how do we create it? And there've been countless composers that I've worked with that have done those kinds of things, and I think those sorts of projects are really exciting, because I learn, again, that's what we've been saying all the way through about collaborating. You learn from people, but you're also learning. You learn about yourself, and you learn about your approach, and I'm somebody who questions everything. I have to know the why behind everything. It drives everybody around me nuts, especially my students, when they write an essay, why this? But I think this idea of this curiosity, and the idea that you can have a sound that you're trying to find between you. You've got an idea of a sound, and you're trying to figure out how to do it. I find that really exciting.
No, I'm so totally with you on the curiosity, because that's what drives me as a musician, as a person, actually, because I think I always feel like I ask the question why for everything. If there's something that's niggling in my head, I'm like, why? And then I go, and nowadays, I have to admit to this, I go onto Google and start searching for information on things that I don't know, but I would like to know. So I'm sure I have a lot of my hard disk in my brain is filled with some unnecessary information on trivia. But yeah, I'm a why person as well, and I completely empathize with you on that one. Needing to know things on the level of curiosity. But I also liked what you were saying about working with somebody who challenges but has a balanced challenge, because I am all for sometimes throwing the technical aspects of the music out of the window, because I feel like if you don't connect with the audience or connect with yourself when you're making the music, however technically brilliant it is, it doesn't achieve the purpose for which you're making it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very much, and many people have said, you've spent so long learning all these kinds of rhythms and putting them together and everything. So do you not want to use it? I'm like, not if I really don't feel it. So if I
Yeah.
feel like the need for a rhythm, I will use it. But if I don't, then I like it to gently flow, and that's that really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you on that completely. Absolutely. So what's coming up, Carla?
Good question. There are lots of things that keep being planned and then sort of moved and then planned and then moved. And what is coming up? I've got a concert happening.
Yay!
Can't believe it. At the end of March at Eclectic, which is with a guitarist called David Black that I've worked with for many years with Rare Scale. We're playing, it's just a very small concert for UCA, which is the University for the Creative Arts. They have an audio research cluster, and it's all part of their research seminars. So we're playing music by Greg Caffrey, which I mean, presumably there won't be an audience, it'll just be a kind of live stream thing. And there's a few little glimmers of hope with performances kind of across the summer. I've got one in Cardiff, I think, touch wood, that's going to happen. And then over the summer, I'm doing an online summer school called Sonic Immersion for flute players. And the whole idea is to do a very intensive 4 weeks of inviting flute players to come and explore sound with a
Wow.
faculty of people who are all kind of new music aficionados. We're all kind of creative thinking flute players, basically. And so the idea is that we can invite students to come work with us, find their own musical journey, and we'll kind of help to facilitate that and have some discussions and just explore sound together for a while, which
Nice.
I'm really looking forward to.
So where is that happening? Is that a UK based?
It's an American project. It's being organised, but it's going to be, the whole thing is going to be online. So
Sure.
we're
Sure.
hoping to have students from all over the place. But yeah, it's essentially an American project. But then the teachers are from, and there's a few people from Europe as well. So it's quite a big mixture of us. It should be fun.
I worked with a flute player in Amsterdam who does a lot of new music. Her name is Leberg.
Yeah,
Do you
she's
know
cool.
Anne?
Yeah, I know Anne. She's one of the people on the faculty for this
Oh,
project.
right.
Yeah, and
Oh.
she was one of the first ever Kingma system flute players. In fact, probably maybe the first. So she's been playing Kingma system
Right.
forever. Yeah, she's amazing.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Because she works, I went and did some work with her in her studio last year, 2019. It feels like one whole year is gone and you don't know anything
I
about
know.
anything. We didn't discuss this, but we were talking about Kaima, which is a
The electronic system. Yeah.
electronic system. So I went to work with her on that because I'm an
cool.
acoustic musician, but I really liked Kaima because
Yeah.
Carla, I think she's the founder of,
Yeah.
her name is Carla as well, and she is based in Ohio. So Carla Scarletti.
Yeah.
So she put me in touch with Anne Leberg, and she said, she said, come to America. I couldn't go to America at that point, so I was like, I was touring in Europe, so I said I can play in Europe if there is somebody, and she said, well, Anne plays. So I went to see Anne, and it was wonderful to do that with Anne.
She's amazing. She's got
she
so much
is-
energy. She's brilliant.
She is absolutely brilliant. Oh,
Yeah.
great! So there is a common friend then. We know Karen, and we
Karen
know
and Anne. Yeah.
Anne.
So what's coming up for you?
What's coming up for me is a variety of things. So I'm doing some composition work for a piano flute duo called Animo. They are a young duo based out of from Gloucestershire,
Mhm.
and they've commissioned me to write a piece for them, which is exciting. I'm
Great.
working with a dancer on a cross-disciplinary piece of work. She wants some music composed, so I'm doing that. Some composition work, but I'm looking forward to a couple of performances that are coming up and a couple of R&D projects that are coming up. So, um, sort of dipping in and out of work till around September this year. So I wouldn't say I'm like frighteningly busy, but I'm busy enough.
Yeah,
So I'm happily busy.
that's
So
good.
some nice things happening and interesting pieces of work. So I'm looking forward to that totally.
Yeah, that's very exciting. It's
Yeah.
kind of, I you sort of strike me as the kind of person that's always going to be happily busy with things. There's always going to be a new project or a new idea to follow up.
Yeah. I mean, how did you guess that? I mean, I am very much like that. For me, devising the project, getting everybody together, the excitement really builds up.
Yeah,
After the project, there are, I mean, yeah, obviously, every project that you do is dear to you
yeah,
because there's so many experiences, but the experiences, the process, and the experience associated with the collaboration and the people. I think people are at the center of my music. I
yeah,
It matters to me who I work with and how I work with them. It's the music in even the music in some ways is, I would say, incidental, but I mean, yeah, it is at the core of what I do. But if the people are not right, the music will never happen. So,
yeah.
people
That's
are
so true.
important. Yeah.
Yeah,
So for me, yeah, that's how. But you hit the nail on the head. I'm constantly something new,
yeah,
something different, something energizing.
yeah.
But you strike me as somebody who would be up for such a challenge as well.
Oh
I
yeah,
can see
totally.
you doing exactly that.
Yeah, I often have trouble remembering what I've done because I'm always thinking about what's going ahead and the next project. And, I have a
Yeah.
problem with ideas, which is if I have an idea, I have to go through with it. And there are always far more ideas than I can actually fit into life. That's the trouble.
Oh yes. Oh yes. I have a kinship towards that that problem.
And I think especially when you're combining lots of different things, so
Yeah.
I mean, especially with composing. And actually, here's an interesting question for you. When you're composing, do you have to, I mean, what is your composition process? Is it, I mean, because obviously as a performer you're improvising, but for example the piece that you're writing for flute and piano, that has to be something presumably notated and fixed in a way. So how do you go about that? What's the process?
There are two ways that I can go about doing that. In working with Sarah and Diana, and actually asking them to improvise to a feel, um, and working through the score in that manner. So what I do is, it's not necessary that at the end of every composition there's a written notated score, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't write or read Western music.
Yeah,
I write and read Indian classical music. So my notation is in Indian classical music. But I don't see a point in me writing an Indian classical notated piece and then just translating that into Western. So
yeah,
if I put all the notes down and then somebody transcribes it for me in Western speak, I don't see that as being a good way of creating a new piece of music for somebody. I'm just giving somebody an Indian music piece to play. So that then defeats the purpose of the collaboration. So what I would do is, if in real life I would have sat down and done a couple of studio sessions and gone through various scales, selected a scale. But I'm a very, very visual person. So for me, the storyboard is very, very important. So I would sit down with the yes, even now I've done that with Yana and Sarah, is that for me it's very important to understand the mood of the piece. So is it a piece that is set in the early morning on a bright summer's day where the sun's just about rising and we can see some birds and there is some cherry blossom in the tree? So that kind of imagery then brings about a certain vibe to the scale and the kind of things that I want to explore. So then the scale develops. And after the scale is in place, then, we work on improvisation. What kind of phrases form part of the scale? What embraces the visuals that we have just talked about. And then once that is happening and people get comfortable, whoever the musician is, once they get comfortable, I actually let them improvise, because for me, they have to be comfortable in their own skin. It's not about me imposing some notes on people, but I sort of guide the improvisation process. And then when we come to points where we think this is really nice, we feel good about this, we could notate it. But in many instances, I might have a very bare bone structure where you have 3 points of, or 3 points of contact, and everything else is improvisation. So you have three phrases which are set, and then everything is improvised. But they get comfortable in that whole improvisation process, and I help the process happen. Mostly I do that. There are some instances when it is completely notated, and when it is notated, it is a mixture of Indian and Western notation, and I do work with somebody who will be able to make Western notation happen for me. So two ways of working, but I prefer the first to the second.
It sounds really fascinating because I kind of think about, my own students, my flute students, and how terrifying for them improvisation can be the first time, and how much I feel it's such an important part of musical expression. I don't think the role of a performer is necessarily just to follow instructions, do as you're told. It's this thing about the emotional aspect as well.
Yeah.
But just thinking about that process that you have with the performers to encourage the improvisation from them, do you ever document that as part of a kind of not a score as such, but something that you could then give to other performers to understand the way of the piece? Or would it be that the piece can only be performed by those original performers?
Um, in the collaboration, I could do that. In the collaborations I have done so far, they have been quite specific to people that want to work in that manner, or want to work with me, or want me to compose pieces. I've never really had a request where somebody has said, that piece that you composed for X and Y, I want to play that. If it ever happened, then it would be nice for the new person, to actually spend some time with me, maybe even a couple of hours, for me to understand what their musicality is. So I am I like to work with any level of musicality. It doesn't matter if they're experts in their field, or if they're, so if you are a beginner, or you're a new musician, emerging musician, then you can make music that's equally appealing, but with certain things that are drawing on your strengths rather than on any weaknesses that you would have. And if you're an expert, then you probably are too set in your ways. So for me, both things have their
Yeah.
pluses and minuses. So I would probably spend, if somebody came to me with a score and said, this is something you've written, would you like to work with me on this, then I would probably give them something so that they can actually devise it to their abilities and means, and then play it differently. It would
Yeah.
be different, played by different people. It would never
Yeah.
be the same.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really, I think it's a very interesting approach, and I think it would be a really good thing as part of just musical education to have that process, that collaborative thing. Just being able to try something that maybe takes you to a new area and exploring your own musicianship. I think that's really fascinating. I think
Yeah.
that's one thing we don't have enough of in the Western education system. My students mostly, they follow, especially, when the kids, they're following these grade exams and they learn pieces and they get told how to do the rhythms and they read the notation and they reproduce it. And you can do that up to a point without having to really be responsible because you're following all the time. Whereas, as soon as you take those safety nets away, I mean, I do a lot of work with graphic scores and, working from different types of notation. I think that's really fascinating, actually, the potential for different types of notation. It's like Scott's piece with the picture. You can create music out of a visual image. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a notated score. And I think those areas are so fascinating because you find new things. You have to use your imagination so much more.
Yeah. I think it's freeing yourself from what you define music to be.
Yeah.
And I think if you actually venture into that, then there is no return, because I think it's that first step that's most frightening. And I would say that's very, very true for somebody with no exposure to Western classical, I mean, or the Western world of music either. So somebody came from India, for example, now, and they wanted to collaborate. Most of the collaborations that I see are literally um, I'm playing the Western score. I'm an Indian musician and I'm going to sing alongside, and we have done some collaborative work. But I don't think it is possible at that level for both parties to understand that collaboration is much deeper. But me having spent time in this world now, I've done this learning over time, and
Yeah.
I've given myself the space and time to learn that. So I think you are right. If there is an opportunity, I'd be more than happy to document and work through an example of how this whole process is done from start to finish
Yeah.
with a musician, and maybe we should do that.
That would be fun. I mean, I think it's one thing I think is really interesting for composers as well as performers is that what they often see is the final end point. You see the finished product. You see the famous symphony of Beethoven or whatever. That's what was created after years of training, hard work, development. And that can be really daunting because I think, let's say a beginner composer, if the only things that you've got to compare yourself against are the masterpieces or the pieces that have been written with loads of experience, sometimes actually seeing the first piece that somebody ever wrote
Yeah,
quite an interesting thing. And from an improvisation point of view, I think it's exactly the same.
yeah,
There's this perception that, oh yeah, there are people who improvise and there are people who don't. And the people who improvise can do it, and they've
yeah,
always been able to do it.
yeah.
Because that's what people hear, but they don't hear the disasters and the kind of really unimaginative sounds that came out at the very beginning, that when you're trying to make baby steps and find confidence and find your voice. And it's like it's the same, as a composer or as an improviser, you have to find your voice. And it's
Totally. It's the opposite is true, because I discovered some years ago, 4 years ago, that there is, if I looked for a South Asian woman who worked in a sort of the mainstream Western orchestra, philharmonic, that kind of a world, there was literally
oh
nobody.
well,
Maybe a couple dotted around films, but games maybe, but nobody in that world. And for me, it was like, why is there nobody even thinking about that world? So I at the minute I've just finished running a mentorship scheme for women of color, composers of color, who have a notion of being a performer but not a composer. Composition is one step too much. And I'm sort of trying to say, like, actually, if you just calmed that idea down and you thought about it, you have the skills. All you need to do is to put the skills together into a package that you will be able to handle. And then you'll be able to compose as well. You have the skills because you improvise and you do this. So it's been quite an interesting journey for me from that point of view as well.
yeah, that's
Um,
amazing. I think
yeah,
there's so much of this being put in boxes. Everything has to fit into a neat little box, and you go to the box that And this thing about being a performer or a composer, I mean, you can't. Why can't you be both? You can, or an improviser. That you have to be one or the other. It's like, I mean, it's funny for me because I think I'm known now as a new music person,
right.
but my plan was always to be a low flutes person. But
Right.
because the repertoire took me there, then it's like, oh yeah, you're the one that does weird things with big flutes and interesting
Yeah.
sounds and things. But it's kind of interesting because that was never, people give you the label, they put the
Yeah.
box around you.
Yeah.
And then when I started playing baroque flute, it was a bit of a kind of, oh, can I do this? Can I go out into the world and play early music because it's not low flute and it's not new
Yeah.
music. It's sort of interesting, those kind of things, and how we break free of those, because the middle grounds, the space in between the boxes, is where it's really interesting.
Definitely, definitely. And as you do, like you said some time ago, I'm given to new ideas. And for me, developing music and cross composition and all that is exciting, but it's a bit like you have to develop your you know your peers as well, because otherwise who will actually want the music?
Yeah.
If there are 15 of us doing the same thing, there'll be more demand for that music, and so everybody will actually be in a good place, as compared to just one person doing some weird thing in the corner who occasionally gets called upon to do something. So it's just all those little
Yeah.
things that you have to think beyond the immediate and see, look a little bit here and there. And yeah, I like to do that, so obviously
That's
just
wonderful.
keep busy.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, it's just so I could talk to you all day, honestly.
We
It's
should
great.
catch up again, though. I know this is for noise flow, particularly, but I think we should catch up again and speak
Totally agree.
and
Yeah,
and do some music together. I would really absolutely love to do some improvisatory collaboration with you on the Kingma flutes, especially the low flutes.
that would be so much fun. I would love to do that.
Yes.